Welcome to this explainer. Today we are unpacking a truly dramatic 700-year story. It's all about empire building, betrayal, and some seriously high-stakes statecraft in medieval India. We're talking, of course, about the Delhi Sultanate. You know, this isn't just your standard timeline of kings and battles. It's a fascinating look at how empires consolidate extreme power and, more importantly, how terrifyingly fast they can unravel when raw ambition turns into fatal overreach.
Okay, let's dive right into this roadmap so we don't get lost in the complex web of medieval successions. We've got 5 chapters today. 1. Prelude to the Sultanate. 2. The Slave Dynasty's rise. 3. Khalji conquests and control. 4. Tughlaq ambition and overreach. And finally, 5. Consolidation to fragmentation.
Section 1. Prelude to the Sultanate, the invasions. To really understand how we get to the foundation of the first proper dynasty in Delhi, we need to quickly step back into deep history to see exactly how the stage was set.
We're compressing hundreds of years of early history here, but the evolution is actually pretty striking. It kicks off in 712 AD with Muhammad bin Qasim's conquest in Sindh, which was kind of just an isolated triumph. Fast forward to 1025 AD, and we see Mahmud of Ghazni conducting his infamous loot-driven raids. He's smashing idols and plundering temples, like Somnath, specifically to restock his treasury and fund his massive army. But by the time we hit Muhammad Ghori and the Second Battle of Touraine in 1192, the strategy completely flips. Ghori wasn't just showing up to loot and leave. No, he established actual garrison towns to guarantee a steady flow of tribute and maintain absolute control. And it's that specific shift from raiding to ruling that makes the Delhi Sultanate possible.
Section 2. The Slave Dynasty's rise, consolidation, and character. All right, we're shifting our narrative now from those early invasions to the brutal, highly calculated consolidation of a permanent empire. Welcome to the Slave Dynasty.
Now, Iltutmish is the guy widely credited with truly consolidating the Sultanate. Because, conquering land is one thing, right? But actually administering it, that's a whole different ballgame. Iltutmish created a highly structured state. He organized his most trusted Turkish officers into this elite administrative body known as the Group of 40. On top of that, he set up the Ikta system, where officers got land assignments instead of cash salaries. If you think about modern statecraft, this is literally textbook regional administration and taxation. He basically anchored the empire, both financially and structurally.
Right after Iltutmish, we run into one of the absolute most fascinating mini-narratives in all of medieval history, Razia Sultan. Nominated by her father to rule, she completely shattered the norms of her time. Razia ditched purdah, she started appearing in court in full male attire, and she even personally commanded her army on horseback. But a real challenge to the status quo was political. She tried to create a counter-nobility to break the Turkish monopoly, even going so far as to appoint an Abyssinian, Malik Jamaluddin Yakut, as the master of the horses. Naturally, this bold move to empower non-Turks sparked a massive and ultimately deadly backlash from the traditional nobility.
Following a few decades of pretty severe instability after Razia, the empire finally found its iron fist in a ruler named Balban. Now, Balban heavily favored a ruthless policy of consolidation over expansion. He knew exactly how dangerous that group of 40 was, so he just completely broke their power by setting up a massive network of spies across every single department. And to assert absolute dominance, he formulated this incredibly strict theory of kingship. He demanded full court prostration. We're talking the ceremonies of Sijda, where nobles had to prostrate themselves, and Paibos, actually kissing the monarch's feet. He even gave up drinking wine just to maintain this terrifyingly austere, autocratic vibe.
Section 3. Khalji conquests and control, the peak of power. So Balban's autocracy really paved the way for this next era, where the Sultanate hits its absolute, centralized peak under a terrifyingly effective ruler.
Al-Din Khalji basically took Balban's template for ruthless governance and just amplified it. Now, what's really interesting here is how Al-Din prevented the kind of rebellions that had constantly threatened his predecessors. He heavily reorganized the spy system, sure, but he went way further into the personal lives of the elite. He banned liquor, he confiscated excess wealth, and get this, he actually ordered that nobles couldn't even host social gatherings or intermarry without his explicit written permission. He completely isolated his potential rivals to lock down absolute control.
But why did he need such obsessive control? Well, here's why it matters. Alauddin was constantly defending against Mongol threats while simultaneously conquering distant lands. To pull that off, he became the first sultan to maintain a massive, permanent standing army, and he paid them entirely in cash.
Now, when you inject that much cash into an economy, you risk runaway hyperinflation. So, Alauddin instituted these unbelievably strict market regulations. He set up 3 separate markets for grains, cloth, and livestock. He fixed the prices and appointed strict intelligence officers, basically market spies, to ruthlessly enforce them. Any violation? Brutal punishment. It was a perfectly balanced, albeit terrifying, economic machine.
Section 4. Tughlaq, Ambition and Overreach. Vision meets reality. The Khalji machine eventually gave way to the Tughlaqs around 1320. And this era, it's characterized by this kind of mad genius ambition, where brilliant ideas fatally crash into the logistical realities of medieval India.
We really have to explicitly contrast the policies of these two eras to understand why the Sultanate ultimately fell. On one side, you have Alauddin's Khalji pragmatism. When he sent his armies way down south, he didn't even try to annex those lands. He just established suzerainty, meaning he made them pay tribute because he knew distant governance was basically impossible. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, on the other hand, suffered from disastrous overreach. He tried to directly annex and rule every single thing he conquered. And by trying to micromanage everything directly, he sparked this massive chain reaction of unmanageable rebellions all across the subcontinent.
So, realizing he couldn't actually govern the massive south from way up north in Delhi, Muhammad bin Tughlaq kicked off a grand and ultimately catastrophic experiment. He ordered the entire capital to be shifted hundreds of miles south to Devagray, which he renamed Dehli. And he didn't just move his court, no. He forced everyday citizens, the elite, and even revered Sufi saints to pack up and march south. It was a total logistical nightmare. And the tragic irony of it all? Once he finally got down to Dehli, he realized he could no longer protect or control North India. So he eventually had to order everyone to just march all the way back to Delhi.
And this brilliantly illustrates the mind of Muhammad bin Tughlaq. He was highly visionary, sure, but he was completely blind to human nature. Taking inspiration from models in China and Iran, he introduced a token currency, minting bronze coins that were supposed to carry the same value as silver. But medieval states simply didn't have the technology to stop forgery. Almost overnight, massive counterfeiting began. Literally every house became its own mint. Just like modern economies printing way too much money, the bronze coins rapidly devalued into absolute worthlessness. Ultimately, the government was forced into a humiliating pivot, having to withdraw the fake bronze coins and replace them with real silver from the royal treasury. It completely devastated the state's finances.
So the crucial point is that his entire reign just became this series of compounding, cascading failures. He planned this massive expedition into Khorasan that totally drained resources, which was immediately followed by a campaign into Karchil, where his army was literally decimated by rain and disease. Then, trying to recover his massive financial losses, he hiked taxes in the highly fertile Doab region by up to 50%, right in the middle of a famine. Obviously, that sparked massive revolts. He even tried to fix the agricultural crisis later by setting up a visionary new Department of Agriculture, the Diwan-i-Kohi, to hand out loans, but the damage was already done. He had completely alienated the very subjects he was trying to govern.
Section 5. Consolidation to Fragmentation. The Empire Unravels. By the time Muhammad bin Tughlaq died in 1351, without even naming a successor, by the way, the structural integrity of the Sultanate was completely hollowed out.
The throne then passed to Firuz Tughlaq, whose reign presents this really fascinating paradox. Because on the surface, things actually looked pretty peaceful. He adopted a strict policy of no wars of annexation and pivoted heavily toward massive public works, digging these expansive canals and building hospitals. However, to appease a severely frustrated nobility, he reversed the merit-based systems of the past and made nobility and army posts hereditary. While that definitely bought him some short-term peace, it was a fatal long-term error. Making military and administrative positions hereditary completely destroyed the meritocracy, fundamentally weakening the Sultanate from the inside out.
Let's move on and see how this builds into total collapse. This internal rot physically fractured the map of India. The once immense unified territory just shrank and splintered. With a weakened hereditary army, the empire was completely vulnerable, so when Timur invaded from Central Asia in 1398, he was essentially kicking down a rotting door. The once mighty Delhi Sultanate bled out, giving way to the much smaller, highly localized regional control of the subsequent Sayyid and Lodi dynasties.
We've covered 700 years of incredibly dramatic history today, from Iltutmish's brilliantly organized state through Alauddin's terrifyingly effective economic controls, right up to Muhammad bin Tughlaq's visionary but disastrous experiments. And it leaves us with a pretty profound question as we look back at the Delhi Sultanate.
When you study these rulers side by side, what do you think? Is the survival of a massive empire truly dependent on the ruthless, uncompromising control of ecology, or does it require the visionary, albeit risky, adaptation of a Tughlaq? It's a fierce contrast, and one that makes the study of history's great empires just endlessly fascinating. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the history you see.